four fruit I'm focusing on: the pomegranates, persimmons, figs, and jujubes, or jujubes, however you want to pronounce it. There's lots of other things that produce in the fall. I've got pictures here of the lemon guava, almonds, kiwi, and cactus pears. There's varieties of apples and pears that produce in the fall. So there's lots of things to choose from, but didn't have time to focus on more than these four. So I'll start with pomegranates. This is probably my all-around favorite fruit, and I've got 3 pomegranate trees growing in my yard, 3 different varieties. And this is something that's been cultivated for centuries in the Middle East and parts of Asia. It was brought to California by the missionaries, like they brought so many of our original fruit trees here back in the 1700s. And it took about 100 years before we actually started commercial production here. But today, California is a major producer of pomegranates, and we produce most of what is consumed domestically up in the Central Valley. Now, these are trees that are they're not your typical tree. They typically are multi-trunked, like the picture on the left. So you can control that by trimming off the so-called suckers as they come up from the base of the plant. If you want to have a single trunk tree, but they naturally want to be multi-trunk. So every year you're going to get new growth from the base that you're going to have to cut back if you want to maintain a single trunk tree. When you do very little pruning, you get something that looks like the middle here, just sort of a big bush with lots and lots of trunks coming up. Now, pomegranate flowers are interesting. I didn't realize that there were male and female flowers for quite a long time. And I was out there hand pollinating to make sure, especially when my trees are young and I had very small trees and I was getting very little fruit, I wanted to make sure I was getting some fruit. So I was going in with a paintbrush to hand pollinate them. But many of them still didn't set fruit. Well, it's because many of those flowers were male flowers. The one that looks right here. Let me go turn on my bright pointer here. So the male flowers, they look similar, but the ovary is not fertile. It's not viable. They're just a pollen source. So you're never going to get fruit from these flowers. But you can easily tell them apart because the male flowers have this sort of a V-shaped base where it's more U-shaped on the fertile flowers, the hermaphrodite flowers. So really easy to tell apart if you know what you're looking for. And that makes a big difference when you're hand pollinating, of course. The fruit botanically it's a berry, but it's an unusual berry where every seed is surrounded by a juice sac called an aril. And the individual arils are compartmentalized into various chambers. At the flower end of the plant, you usually have 3 to 9 chambers. I think I've seen 3 to 8. That's my highest, but technically I guess you can have up to 9. And then the bottom chambers, there's 1, 2, or 3 down here typically. And you'll have, depending on the size of the pomegranate, you'll have up to about 1,400 of these seeds in each piece of fruit. And these are non-climacteric fruit, meaning that once you've picked them, they're not going to continue to ripen. So that's why this is so much better to grow at home than to buy it in the market, which is true of much of our fruit. But pomegranates in particular, I've had so many bad pomegranates from the market. It's just because they weren't left on the tree long enough and they hadn't fully ripened. I'm still picking pomegranates now in December. My tree is almost done, and I've been lucky because it hasn't rained. If it had rained by now, those fruit would have split. But because we've had such a dry fall, the fruit is still hanging on the tree pretty well. So this is the easiest way I found to open them up, is to start off on the flower side of it, score the cap there and pull that off. And then you can see the chambers that are there. This one looks like it has about 6 chambers, and you can score it on the sides along where those white membranes are. And then it pulls apart very easily, and you're left with these, left with the segments, much easier to deal with than to just come in from a random angle. This link here shows you that technique. Plus, they go on to show you the underwater method to try to separate out all the arils if you want to use them for salad or something. And it's probably the least messy way to open a pomegranate. There's quite a few cultivars out there. The most common is the Wonderful. That was the first one I bought. Every nursery that has pomegranates is going to have Wonderful. It's also the most common commercial variety. Almost every pomegranate you buy in the market is going to be Wonderful. There's another one called the Granada. It's very closely related to Wonderful. It's what they call a bud sport. It grew as a mutation from a Wonderful tree, And they started propagating it. And the reason they noticed it is because it produces fruit earlier than Wonderful does. And so it's better for the coastal areas where you're not getting as much heat. The pomegranates love heat to ripen. And if you don't have as much heat, you want to pick a variety that doesn't require as much, like the Granada. There's other varieties like the Utah Sweet. There's other so-called sweet varieties that have little acidity. They're just sweet. The juice tends to be almost clear, and they don't stain as much because of that. And then the last one I'm showing you here is my favorite variety, and a lot of people have this as their favorite. It's called the Parfianca. And I'm not sure why we don't see more of that being grown commercially, but it's an excellent fruit. And then here's just a serving suggestion. Pomegranates are a great addition to a salad, so I pulled up this one. I've made this recipe. It's quite good. Mixing onions into your pomegranates actually turns out pretty good.
Hey, Jeff, if you don't mind, before you move on from the pomegranate, will you just go back and review have more comment about the hand pollination?
So the hand pollination.
Yeah.
Well, you don't need to hand pollinate. These will, you will get insect activity that does the pollination for you. But I wanted to make sure I was really getting good pollination because I'd seen so many flowers drop without setting fruit. Well, that's because those flowers were male flowers, and they're never going to set fruit. And so I was just taking a small art paintbrush and going in there and swirling it around, and that moves the pollen here onto the pistil, and that's all it takes. And then you've pollinated the tree. They're usually self-fruitful. You don't have to bring pollen from another plant back and forth like you do with some varieties of fruit. So it makes pomegranates very easy to grow because of that.
And then someone wanted to know, why is the Parfianca your favorite of the varieties?
Well, the seeds are softer. It's got really dark, rich juice, and the seeds. I really like the softer seeds. I think that makes a big difference. You can chew them up better than the wonderful seeds, or what we call medium hard seeds.
Mm-hmm.
When I put them in a salad, I don't spit them out. But when I'm eating a whole pomegranate, I typically don't want to eat all the seeds in a whole pomegranate. It's just too many. In a salad, it's fine. But the Parfianca, there are other varieties. The sweet varieties tend to have softer seeds as well.
There you go. And will you do one favor for one of our viewers? Can you point out on this slide here the female part of the flower so they can see the male and the female?
The female part, the pistil is always in the center of the flower, and it's always surrounded. If it's a perfect flower, so it has both the male and female parts, the stamen always surround the pistil. So that's what we're seeing here. These are all, the pollen is the yellow part there. And so once the flower is open, that pollen will be free to be moved around. And so a paintbrush is just a simple way to do it. Okay,
thank you, Jeff.
Sure, let me go on to persimmons. Totally different fruit. Almost no acidity in this fruit at all. It's a very sweet fruit. Native to China. It's also the national fruit of Japan, so they're often called Japanese persimmons instead of Asian persimmons. There is also an American persimmon that is more from the east. It's usually a bigger tree, a little bit smaller fruit, and very astringent until they're fully ripened. They're not as popular to grow culturally, for people to grow at their homes, but you can buy them. But we're going to focus on the Asian persimmon because this is the type of persimmon we typically grow here in California, and it's the ones you find in the market as well. So this is the Fuji, which is the persimmon that's the one that the Fuyu rather, not Fuji, the Fuyu, which is a sort of flat, squarish shaped persimmon, which you can eat like an apple. It doesn't need to be soft and mushy to lose the astringency. And these are the Hachaias, which are the ones that they're more oblong, and they really need to be either let ripen fully till they're just mushy before the astringency goes away. To eat them, or you can dry them, and drying them removes that astringency completely. So this is a technique we'll show in a minute. So this is a really beautiful ornamental tree. So it makes this a great landscape tree. It looks good with the fruit on it. It looks good with fall colors, and the fruit will hold long after the leaves have dropped. So you may have a tree that looks like this. So really pretty tree. Pretty good size, maybe 25 to 30 feet tall if you don't control it with pruning. But most of our fruit trees we can keep down to 8 to 10 feet pretty readily with annual pruning. The flowers are really small and inconspicuous. They don't stand out much at all. They're typically, most of the persimmons we buy they're growing, they only have female flowers on the tree. This is something called dioecious. When you have trees that have different trees that have male and female flowers. Some persimmons are monoecious, meaning that they have both separate male and female flowers. So we'll show you what varieties are which. The ones we get mostly in the market, the Hachias, the astringent ones, and the Fuyus, the non-astringent varieties. Those are both ones that are female-only trees, and so they don't have any pollen on the tree. And that's why those fruit are typically seedless. These also produce fruit without needing pollination. This is something called parthenocarpy. And so it's really easy to grow a tree like this. If it doesn't need to be pollinated and it likes our climate, you can't lose with a tree like this. So the fruit itself, these are various varieties you can get. There's many others as well, but they divide them up principally into two categories: the astringent varieties and the non-astringent varieties. So, or they might call these the Hachia varieties and the Fuyu varieties. So, like a chocolate is one of the astringent varieties, and then some of these also need to be, they're what they call pollination variant is the term. Pollination variant, meaning if they get pollinated and they produce seeds, it actually changes the color and the flavor of the fruit. And so some of these varieties, you actually want them to be pollinated because the fruit develops a better flavor. And some of them will actually lose their astringency if they're pollinated as well, so they don't have to be ripened as much before you can eat them. So the chocolate here, the maru, and the coffee cake are three varieties that are pollination variant. You want them to be pollinated. In the case of the chocolate, that's easy because it has male flowers on the tree with the female flowers, and so it'll provide the pollen itself. Other varieties like the maru and coffee cake, I think they only produce female flowers. And so you need a second tree if you want to have the best quality fruit from these trees. Anyway, this variety, this Seijo here, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It's a small one. It's one of the astringent varieties. And I haven't tried this one yet, but this is said to be one of the best flavored of the astringent varieties. So I'm hoping to be able to try that someday.
Hey, Jeff, we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Someone wants to know, does the fuju ripen off of the tree? This person's, Kathleen's, they're always being eaten by squirrels. She said years of wins by the squirrels, 24 for the squirrels, 0 for her. And I said squirrels always win. And then Allison wanted to know, she said her fuyu are round and they can be eaten either hard or soft. Any idea about the variety? Her Japanese grandfather planted that tree. I bet you it's beautiful. In the 50s or 60s.
Well, I wouldn't really want to take a guess at the variety. If it's something that can be eaten hard or soft, it's going to be one of the Fuyu types. But there are several different ones in that category. Like all four of these are those types, like the giant Fuyu. And there's other ones as well. I don't have a complete list in front of me of Fuyu type. The Jiro is actually the type that we actually grow mostly in California. It's often marketed as Fuyu. When you buy a Fuyu persimmon in the market, it's probably the Jiro variety, not an actual Fuyu, which is one that's grown extensively in Japan, but they're marketed as Fuyus here. So it might be a Jiro, it might be a Moto. That's another commercial variety of the non-astringent types grown here. Yeah, you can pick. They have to be at least part. I think with persimmons, I think if you pick them before they started coloring up at all, and you bring them in the house, they may not ripen properly. But once they started ripening, I think you can bring them in, and then they'll continue to ripen. But I'm not positive because I'm not growing persimmons myself.
And then one more question about how old does the Hachai need to be to bear fruit? Maybe that'd be a good question for all of them, like how past juvenile stage.
Those are fruit trees. These are all cloned fruit trees. They're typically persimmons, I believe, are typically grafted. And so they take a variety from a mature, they take a bud or a bud stick from a mature tree and graft it onto usually a seedling rootstock. And because it's already mature when they graft it, it'll produce fruit pretty quickly, but I would say 2 or 3 years probably before you really expect to see much fruit. Even if you have a fruit tree, some fruit trees will produce very early when you just get them, and the tree is really too young to support fruit at that point, and you usually want to take the fruit off for the first year or two. No one does that. That's like, do what I say, not what I do kind of thing, because everyone wants to try the fruit as soon as they can. But don't let it grow too much fruit the first couple of years because it's going to stunt the growth of the tree. It needs to put its energy into leaves, stems, and roots at that point, not into fruit.
Great, thank you. And Ellen had a great tip. She said she freezes hers, and they come out mushy the next day when you're defrosting them.
Well, I read about that too, and I tried it. I'll show you in a second where I tried that with. So I'm going to show you. This is how you can tell if a hachia is ripe. You just squeeze it, and they're mushy ripe. Also, you can just take the bracts at the top and peel it off. It'll pull off without needing a knife to do it. And then often you just you cut them in half and you scoop them out. They're very soft at this point, very squishy. It's not my favorite way to eat them. I don't like the texture of them this way. So I typically dry them first, or I've tried this freezing method. But let me talk about drying first. There's traditional ways of drying. In Asia, this is a very big thing in Asia, where they create these different styles of fuyus and give them as gifts. You can find them now in the Asian markets. They're really good. And if they're dried correctly, they will develop this white sugary coating. This is not something that's put on them. This actually comes from the fruit itself. This is a method I've tried. This is from Japan called hoshigaki, where you hang the persimmon. You first peel the persimmons so they're naked, and then you hang them from their stems. Now, the ones I bought, I did some that I bought in the market. They did not have stems, and so I put little stainless steel screws into the top, and they anchor very well into the bracts there, so they did pull out. And then you hang them, and then after a week or so, they've kind of formed a second dry skin. And in the Japanese style, they actually massage them every few days to break up the pulp and distribute it and make break down the fibers. And so this is a really big thing. You'll see pictures of people hanging these in the eaves of their house and stuff. It's a really cool thing. Now, when I did it, mine looked kind of like the picture in the center here. I did not end up with that nice sugary coating on mine. I'm not quite sure what conditions you need to get that. One thing I read said that the humidity, you have to have a little bit of humidity to develop those sugars. I'm not really sure what it takes to do it. Mine did not do that, but they still tasted good.
Good. Thank you, Yvonne, for the freezing tip. And then Allison had a quick question. She wants to know, can you graft a hachaya onto a fuyu tree?
I think so. They're grafted onto the same type of rootstock, so I would assume it may be compatible, but I don't know. I've never looked at that specifically. A lot of times you can do that with your different fruit trees. Sometimes there's incompatibilities so the grafts don't do well. I don't know in that particular combination.
Okay, so we'll have to try that, Allison. Joni said she knows someone who makes Yorkshire pudding with them. All right, thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I'm going to get to something that looks sort of like that. So this is my preferred method of eating them here, is to dry them quickly with a dehydrator. So I just slice them up, about 1/4 inch thick, a little bit thicker. And it just takes a day to dry them, and they're absolutely delicious. They're like candy at this point. So you want to start off with unripe fruit. You want it to be firm so it'll slice up nicely. And the hachiyas, I think, make the best dried fruit. They're the sweetest. The fuyus are pretty good. They're a little more leathery, I find. You can either peel them or not peel them. And it completely removes that astringency. If you've ever eaten an unripe hachiya persimmon, you will only do it once. It is not a good experience. That astringency like sits on your tongue, and it's not a good sensation. But drying them removes it completely. So this is a really quick, easy way to get them ready. Okay, so this is a method here. This is just a couple serving suggestions: a persimmon spinach salad, and then a method of freezing the fruit and then eating it with something like cream, or in this case, coconut milk on it. So I tried this. I took some persimmons that were pretty much ripe. They were pretty mushy, and I froze them. These are store-bought persimmons. They were hachiyas. And then you take them out of the freezer and rinse them a little bit under water, and then you can peel the skin pretty easily. I did find that the stem is still hard to remove, because I don't want to jam a knife hard into this hard fruit too hard. So I think the next time I do this, I'll actually remove the stem first before I freeze it. The skin came off pretty easily. But the persimmons were really sweet, but they still had this back end astringency, which is really unpleasant. So I'm not sure what went wrong with that, because they were already ripe, I thought, in the beginning with, and I did the extra freezing, which is supposed to help even reduce that astringency more. So it may not always work. I don't know what the combination you need to just freeze it to get rid of the astringency. In any case, they tasted really good until the astringency kicked in. All right, I'm going to go on to figs. Melissa, nothing there we need to address on persimmons?
Nope, I think we got everything, but we do have a great fig question. So when you go through that, we'll have a fig question.
Okay. All right, well, figs. This is another one. These can be quite large trees. They're often wider than they are tall. They are very subjective to sunburn or sun scald. So a young tree should normally be whitewashed with a 50-50 diluted interior white primer or white paint, interior latex, to protect the branches until a tree's got a large enough canopy to do it for you. The roots can be invasive as well, so you may want to be careful where you plant them. It's going to take years and years before the tree is big enough to cause a problem, but thinking in the long term. They do have an irritating white latex that comes out when you pick the fruit or cut the branches, so you want to make sure you don't get that on you or in your eyes. Of course, this is a fruit that's been around for a long time. Some people think this was one of the original fruits, that was meant to be in the Garden of Eden rather than the apple. But pomegranates are also vying for that position, so who knows? This picture is not a work of art. This is or not a classic work of art in any case. It's a fertilizer commercial. I thought was interesting. I was looking for pictures of fig leaves to show in this presentation, and that seems like an incongruous way to advertise fertilizer, but in any case. Anyway, they've been around for a long time. They have found remnants of figs in ancient excavations. California, they came here at the same time as a lot of the other fruit in the 1700s by the missionaries. And now California is the second largest producer in the world of figs, just behind Turkey. And we produce almost all of the figs that are produced here in the United States. So the figs, I'm going to show you a couple of my fig trees because this is this is one of the fruit I'm growing. This is my favorite fig by far. It's called the panache or tiger stripe or striped tiger. My tree is not growing as big as I was expecting it. This is not necessarily a dwarf tree, but it's sort of dwarfed in my environment. But in any case, it still produces a very good fruit. It's sweet without being cloyingly sweet to me. I have another fig that I'll show you that I think is a little bit too sweet for my taste, but I still like it. It has a little bit thicker rind or the outer part here, which I actually like. It doesn't produce what they call a breba crop, which is a early crop that some figs produce true crops. They produce a early crop in the very early summer or late spring, and then they produce a main crop in late summer into fall. And this one typically doesn't, although this year I have some figs on my tree that may turn into a breva crop. I'm not sure what conditions led to that. And the other one I have is called the Violette de Bardot, and this is a dwarf tree. It only gets to about 10 feet tall naturally, and so it's very easy to maintain with pruning. I just show this because I bought this as a mail order fig. This is how it came. It's just a small, just a whip. It doesn't really have any branches. It just has a few leaves at the top. And 4 years later, I've got it. It's pretty much at its mature size now. Again, it's a very good fig, but it's a little bit too sweet for my taste. Now, figs they're a very unusual fruit because, you're never going to see what we think of as flowers on a fig tree because the flowers are inside what we think of as the fruit. They're really tiny flowers lining the inside of this fruit before it matures. The structures has a special name. It's called a syconium, and the flowers in most of the figs we grow do not need to be pollinated. They're another one of these parthenocarpic fruit that doesn't need pollen in order to develop fruit. But as you'll see, there are some varieties that do need to be pollinated. They call this an accessory fruit because it's made out of it's not from the ovary specifically. The interior jelly-like material is from the ovary of the fruit, but the outside is what they call the receptacle, which is normally just a piece right below the flower. It's right at the top of the stem below the flower. And in this case, it develops into the fruit. It also develops into a fruit on a strawberry. That's the red part of the strawberry is this receptacle material. So I think of it as sort of an inside-out strawberry. The strawberry has the seeds on the outside of this receptacle, and this one has it on the inside. And it's also a multiple fruit because it combines a whole bunch of flowers into a single fruit. And so these are the types of figs we grow. These are all the same species. They're all edible figs. The common one is most of the varieties you see in the nurseries, even online, are common figs. There's a whole bunch of different varieties of those. And they're the ones that have just female flowers. They don't need pollen, and the seed. They do have seeds in there, but they're actually not pollinated seeds, and so they're hollow and unviable. Now, there are other types of figs that are grown commercially. The Smyrna, or they renamed it the Calamurna for growing here in California. This is a fig that does require pollination by a small wasp that actually crawls into that little ostiole, the little opening at the end of the fig, and pollinates the fig. But they also have to grow another fig tree with it to provide the pollen. That's called a capper fig. These wasps aren't able to develop in they will pollinate the Smyrna fig, but they can't successfully lay their eggs in there, and their eggs will not hatch out of the Smyrna fig. So you don't have to worry about having a opening of a fig full of little wasps. But the capper fig will be full of little wasps. So you have to have a capper fig for the pollen, and you grow that with the Smyrna fig. So that's why most homeowners don't grow these. And then there's another type called the San Pedro, which is a little in between. It puts out an early crop that does not require pollination like the common fig, and then a second crop that does require pollination.
Oops, can we have a couple of questions, Jeff?
Sure.
Let's go back. I wanted to go back a little bit. Brian, I do have one comment about the persimmons. Brian had a great thing. He says he makes hoshigaki almost dry. He puts them in the refrigerator in a bag, and the sugar develops in a few months. So thank you for that tip.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so after the dried. Okay.
That's great. Yvonne had a great tip. Thank you so much, Yvonne. She said that for sun scald protection, when you were talking about in the beginning, make sure you're using interior latex paint since oil-based.
Absolutely. Interior latex paint. The exterior paint has additives in it. You don't want to put that on your tree.
Right. So make sure you use interior. Thank you so much, Yvonne. A couple of questions about varieties. Someone asked, is our brown turkey trees smaller than other varieties?
Yeah, I don't remember if the brown, I think it might be one of the smaller ones. There's a few other varieties, the violet, the brown. I think the brown turkey is one of the smaller varieties. I'm not positive.
Joni wanted to know the tree that you bought when your mail order tree. That was funny. Did you buy it bare root?
No, actually, that one came in a small pot, a tree pot, one of those kind of tall, 4-inch diameter but tall pots. And I think that was for Peaceful Valley. Which is they have a lot of.
I love them. Yeah. And someone said, any tips on the Violetta, like growing those, maybe this in any tree in a container?
Well, it is one of the smaller ones, and so you can grow into a container, but there's actually a better choice if you really want to keep a small fruit tree. There's one called, I'll show you at the very end, it's called Little Miss Figgy, and it is actually a bud sport of the Violette de Bardot, and so it produces the exact same fruit, but in a smaller tree. And I've had many people ask me about those, and so I found out they're available at Armstrong, also online, but Armstrong has them in the nursery.
Okay.
One of our master gardeners just bought one recently.
Yeah. Suggestions on controlling squirrels. That is the never-ending question for everyone. Besides, have a tree that they can eat by themselves.
For some reason the squirrels are not eating a lot of my figs. I have mostly bird problems on figs. They eat a lot more, but the squirrels eat a lot of my pomegranates and my stone fruit and things. And there isn't, without just completely enclosing the tree, you can't protect it from squirrels. The only thing you can do is trap, which I am very reluctant to do. I don't want to do that. You can't trap and relocate in California. That's illegal. You'd have to trap and kill. And so it's not a choice a lot of us want to have to make. And so I think once your trees, you get enough fruit trees and the trees are big enough, you can share with the wildlife. But yeah, it's frustrating. There's really no easy way to deal with squirrels.
Well, here's a good one. This was about the persimmons. A person had a fuyu 5 or 6 years, but this is a great question in general. It's in a terrible spot. But can they move this tree? So can you move any of your fruit trees?
You can if they're small enough and you get enough of the root system. You can move them. I do a lot of volunteering at the farm at the Fairplex where the LA County Fair is, and they redid some of the fair and they had to move several fruit trees and mature large trees. Some figs. It wasn't a persimmon. There was an almond, and no, there was a persimmon. And they did not get much of the root out when they did this. And those trees, your fig trees are real survivors. These figs, the root system was only a little bit bigger. The trunks were probably 10 inches across, and the roots were maybe 15 inches across. And there's hardly any root ball at all with those trees. And what happens is they had to just cut off all the major branches from the fig trees, but the figs actually would come back from that. The other trees looked like they were terrible. They also didn't get enough root system with them, and so most of the branches were dying on those trees, and you're seeing new leaves kind of coming out from the center of the tree trying to survive. It didn't look good, so if a tree's small enough, I think it's doable. But once you have a big tree, it's really gonna be hard to get enough of the roots.
Okay. Let's see. There was one. I want to go back to Vicky. Vicky was out the box asking a question about her. She was saying that her fig wasn't producing. She's in Ventura, and she said that she just had no figs this year. What do we think that might be a problem with that?
I don't know. I mean, yeah. You didn't see any figs at all. That's kind of weird. They do require a little chill, but not a lot of chill. Figs are typically, maybe 100 hours to 200 hours at most, requiring winter chill. That's the number of hours during the winter when the temperatures drop down below 45 degrees, but above freezing. And your figs, all these fruit trees I'm showing you today, they're all deciduous. They all require some chill, but they're all fairly low chill, and so they usually grow pretty well everywhere in LA County and surrounding areas. So I don't know what would keep the figs from producing unless there's other health issues with the tree.
Or
Make
your
sure it's you're
or
watering it
surrounding
enough,
soil.
and a tree that's not healthy it may not put on fruit because it's extra effort for the tree. So I would make sure they take some fertilizer, but they're not necessarily heavy feeders, and make sure you're watering it evenly. Deep watering it, during the heat of the summer, probably once a week, to keep it adequately watered so it doesn't stress out. I'll show you my trees. Actually, I had one of my trees dropped a lot of leaves in the middle of summer because I wasn't watering often enough, and that was its response into not to drying out too much.
Mhm.
And so I ended up bringing in mulch during the summer and putting in almost a foot of mulch around the trees, and it made a world of difference because it keeps them moist and cool, and it reduced my burden. I didn't have to water quite as often.
Well, maybe that might be something that you could think about too. Mark was saying that for his pomegranate, he's got a 12-year-old wonderful and produces very little fruit, but tons of water sprouts. Anything he can do? Maybe Mark, you can just adapt what Jeff just said in terms of your pomegranate tree. What do you think, Jeff?
Well, pomegranates are producing a lot of water sprouts, or the fig.
His pomegranate trees. We went back. His a 12-year.
If they're coming up from the base, we usually think of those as suckers. And I trim those out every winter. So when the tree's bare, it's easy to get in there and do some structural pruning and remove the suckers from the base. I haven't really seen what I would call water sprouts from. Those are usually vertical branches coming off of established branches. But you also want to remove those as well, depending on the type of fruit tree, because they typically really vertical branches don't flower and fruit. They're trying to get up to the sun. They often will shade out the parts of your tree that are producing, and so they're not usually a benefit. The only reason I would keep a water sprout is if I wanted to train it into a fruiting branch by bending it down more horizontally.
Kathleen wanted to know, does starting a fig from cuttings affect fruit production or quality?
Not that I know of. I mean, that's the way of cloning a tree. I mean, you can do cuttings, they do, air layering, they do grafting. It's all kind of the same thing, except that the root system will be different depending on how your process is. But as far as I know, you're getting a clone of the tree, and so the fruit should be exactly the same as it was on the mother plant. And that's the reason it's done, and so we get the same quality of fruit time after time.
Okay. And then we have a question from Facebook from Alicia. She wants to know, that we've had a couple of these, so maybe we can address, if you want to do it now, or you can let us know you want to wait till the end to address or get the mini list together for people that of trees that would all pomegranates or fig that might do very well in containers.
Okay, yeah, I don't know exactly. I don't have a list. Yvonne probably has a lot of suggestions. She's got a lot more experience than I do. But yeah, you want to try to stay with smaller varieties for containers because the root systems, it'll be fine when it's young, but eventually it becomes root bound. And so for very long haul, there are varieties of citrus, things like kumquats, calamondins that do well in containers because they're naturally smaller plants. Various types of figs will do well, like I mentioned. There are varieties that are smaller that'll do fine in containers for many years.
Okay. Someone wants.
I don't have a list per se out there.
Okay.
Okay.
But we keep them small. I think it's hard.
Well, let me go on because we're running kind of late. I've got quite a bit to cover still. So let me just finish up with this. So this is showing you the captification process in a commercial orchard, where the They don't necessarily grow the Capra figs in the same orchard as the Calamernas, but they'll harvest the Capra figs that are full of wasps at this point, put them into paper bags and hang them from the trees. And it's a bit of a process. They have to make sure they don't have too many wasps, because if they're over pollinated, the fruit splits, like in this picture here. So it's a balancing act. But the reason they grow these trees, and the reason they want these pollinated figs, these are usually sold as dried figs, and you'll find these in the market, either Smyrnas or Calamernas, along with some of the other figs like mission figs that are available dried. And the reason they do is because they are developing seeds, and the developed seeds add a nutty flavor to the fig. They change the fig profile flavor. So these are very popular for dried figs. And there's showing you a few of them. And so they often, there's often sort of an urban myth that, figs are can be full of wasps, and it's really not true. The Smyrna figs do become pollinated, and so a female, one or more female wasps, or tiny little wasp, was in that fig. But when after the wasp lays its eggs, it dies in the fig. It can't really leave, and it just gets absorbed. There's a enzyme in the fig that breaks down the wasp, and it gets absorbed into the fruit. So you're not going to open up a fig and find little wasps in there. That's kind of a disgusting idea. Same with the Calamerna, but the mission fig is not going to be pollinated, so that's not an issue at all. And then these are just showing a few. There's so many varieties of figs. These are just showing you a few that are popular, besides the ones I've already shown you. The brown turkey, and I think that brown turkey, like you said, is probably a little smaller. Black mission is probably the most popular, very productive, very good fruit. And some of them have a little bit different flavor profiles. They describe some of them having more of a berry flavor, others having more of a caramel flavor. Peter's Honey's fig is one I want to try next. I've heard a lot of good things about this one. And so here's Little Miss Figgy, and as you can see, it does produce, even when it's quite small. There's quite a bit of fruit on this little tiny tree here. And this will stay quite small. The Violet Bardot gets up to 10 feet. This only gets up to about 6 feet without pruning. So that would be a very, very good choice for a small area where you want to keep a tree. So this is showing some of the fig pairing. Figs are often paired with rich meats and cheeses, and it's just showing a little fig recipe there, a little variation on the Newton. So Jujubes, this is probably the fruit that you're least familiar with of the ones I talked about. It's a huge thing in Asia, though. This has been grown for, again, hundreds of years in Asia. It's being grown now in California commercially, but it's much smaller scale. There's quite a few people now growing this in their backyards. One of our master gardeners has several acres, she has like 30 trees or something, 30, 40 of these trees. I don't forget how big a property it is. And these are these are called Chinese dates too, because they're often sold dried. They develop a date-like taste when they're dried, but they're very different texture. They have a sort of a sponginess to them. I really like these. The branches are very zigzaggy. But they have vicious thorns on these trees. So I learned that the hard way when I was asked to prune one and hadn't had any experience with them before. So do be careful around these. The flowers again are inconspicuous, sort of like the persimmon flowers, but these are bisexual flowers. They have the male and female parts. Again, some of these trees are self-fruitful and some are not. So they're usually seen in little clusters like this. Anyway, we won't talk too much about the flowers on these because I'm running out of time. So the two most popular varieties by far are the Li and the Lang. And the Li is one that's typically grown as a fresh eating fruit, and the Lang as a dried fruit, although they're both good for fresh eating and dried. The reason they're grown together is the Li is self-fruitful and the Lang is not. So the Lang, meaning the Lang has to get pollinated from another type of Jujube tree. And so the Lis and Lang are usually, usually see people growing these in pairs. But there are other varieties that may even be better at flavor they're newer out there, like the GA866, the Honey Jar. There's a Chico, there's a Sugar Cane, there's Sherwood. There's a whole bunch of other varieties out there I would look for. If I were going to grow one of these, I would look for one of the other types of varieties and maybe try to get 2 trees. These are both self-fruitful. You'll get more fruit if you have a different variety there to cross-pollinate with, but you'll get some even if you just have the one tree. These are just some unusual looking ones that really can't find these in nurseries around here, except for the contorted is available. This one supposedly has good fruit, but it's really grown because of the branch shape is more ornamental. And these others, they're just interesting looking fruit, the teapot mushroom, but I don't think you'll be able to find those easily. And then this is this is often used to make herbal teas. You can use it in soup recipes. And usually it's dried. I just eat it fresh or dried. Haven't really used them in cooking so far, but I can see them being used in a lot of different recipes. You can actually substitute them in a lot of recipes that call for dates or raisins, that kind of thing. So I want to talk a little bit about winter chill, because our fruit trees, all these trees need a little bit of chill, and so it's good to know your area so you know what kind of chill you're getting. Now, the University of California has a system where they have weather stations that are monitoring chill. They have 11 stations in LA County. You just need to find the one that's closest to you, or which ones you're between, and kind of interpolate between those. I'm near Pomona, and so last year we got about 400 hours of chill. That's a little bit better than average. And it means I want to buy varieties of fruit trees in general that don't require too much more chill than that. If I do, they may not produce reliably. If you're up in the high desert, you get a lot more chill during the winter. And if you're near the coast, you're going to get less. And so you just have to know that and try to choose varieties based on that information. And then site selection is always important with any kind of gardening. The sunny side, the southern side of your house, if it's not obstructed, will be the warmest, sunniest part. Most of our fruit trees do best in that area, but you may also want to consider other parts of the yard too. That'll do just fine. The structures on our property can make a big difference if you're trying to keep a cold-sensitive plant like a papaya from freezing in the winter. If you have it up against a masonry wall or something that's south facing, that wall is going to heat up at night. All the structures in the area are going to heat up at night, and they re-radiate that heat, help raising the temperatures around the tree a few degrees. That can make the difference between life and death for a cold sensitive tree. And then if you're living on a slope, cold air is going to flow downhill, and it's going to collect in pockets wherever it accumulates. And so these pockets, you want to avoid planting your cold sensitive plants there, but your cold requiring plants, that's a good choice. It's going to be cooler than the rest of the yard, and it's the buds on the plants that need to experience that chill in order to flower and fruit properly. And then just quick on pruning. This is just showing the basic pruning cuts, the heading cut that we use to shorten a branch, and you always want to cut about a 1/4 inch above a bud. And typically you're trying to pick a bud that is outward facing from the center of the plant, because whenever you do a heading cut, that stimulates new growth from the buds right below it. Usually the bud right below it and maybe a couple more. It removes the hormone. Well, there's a hormone that is coming down from the terminal bud that represses, keeps these other buds dormant. And so once you cut off the top, the hormone eventually dissipates, and these buds will break dormancy. And then the removal cut here is just when you just want to be careful not to damage this area called the branch collar. There are special cells in there that help to close over the wound and compartmentalize the damage. If you cut into that, you can end up with some nasty scars on your tree. So fruiting habits of each of these things, I'm going to talk about the fruiting habit last before we go on to citrus. And this is just showing you, it's really important to understand how your tree fruits in order to know how to prune it and size control it. So apples often have spurs. These are short branches that persist for years and years and produce fruit. They just grow a little bit each year, a millimeter or two, and they produce fruiting buds every year. And so you want to make sure you're preserving those spurs. Whereas a peach is going to fruit on the buds that formed last year. So the branch that grew last year, and you don't want to cut all those one-year branches off, because that's the only place that these trees fruit. So you can shorten these branches, which you typically don't want the fruit growing right at the tips, unless on a long skinny branch, it's going to bend it down. And so you can cut it back, but you want to leave some branches from last year's growth on a peach. And then cherries have both. They both have these lateral buds and the spurs. So it differs on every type of fruit tree. So pomegranates, they grow on new growth, but off of previous growth. And so it'll be on the new growth where you'll see the buds and the fruit and flowers. And once the branches get to be too old, they become less productive. And so this is showing you how to prune out an older branch, but leaving a younger piece of it in place to replace it. And so, you know, but of course you want to be careful with pomegranates. They do have very long spines, and you know, gloves and eye protection are critical.
Hey, Alan, just quick question about pruning. Alan, I hope that answered your question about, he was asking when is the best time to prune your pomegranate. And then
Best
Kathleen
time
said,
is well, usually our deciduous trees, we do most of our pruning typically in the late winter, early spring, before they started leafing out again, because you can see everything. You can see all, you know, the branches are bare, you can really see everything, and so you know exactly what you're doing. It's easier to make decisions.
okay. And then Kathleen wants to know, paint cut area after pruning or not?
That is old advice that has now been proven to be wrong. You should not actually paint over wounds on the tree. It used to be thought that that's protecting it from bacteria and stuff, but now they realize you're actually sealing in bacteria and creating a nice environment for them to develop underneath that coating.
Okay.
So no, just do not do that. I would avoid, you know, pruning when the weather's wet. You don't want, you know, you want things to dry out quickly when you prune. And in some ways, pruning in the summer can be advantageous because they heal so quickly if you prune in the summer, but it's much harder to see what you're doing in the summer.
And then Yvonne had a great tip. She said figs are perfect for gardeners who are scared of pruning trees. They put out a lot of new spring growth and summer fruit, and so you can't really ruin it. Not to mention figs are delicious. Thank you so much, Yvonne, for that tip.
Yeah, I was going to show you figs. Figs are next. So you'll see on
Yay!
those. So persimmons also produce on new growth, but they're on buds that produced last year. So if you take this one here, well, they didn't prune this one. This is the growth from last year, and so these are buds that produced last year. But these buds are going to form new branches, which themselves will produce the buds that produce the fruit this year. So you know, if you're going to size control these, it's recommended cutting back the longer branches. So this longer branch then produced growth, but that growth did not fruit this year. It's going to fruit next year because whereas the one you didn't prune is going to fruit this year. So again, you have understanding all these complicated things really helps when it comes to pruning. So figs, as Yvonne said, are one of the very easiest for pruners, because if you just you can harshly prune your tree all the way back, and you'll still get fruit this year. You'll get the main crop. The main crop is produced on new growth that starts in the spring. And so on this tree here, this is last year's growth. Can't really see the branch well, but it goes up to right here. This is the end of last year's growth. And these are the figs that were produced in the fall and winter, and these ripen in the spring and are ready to eat. I think I harvested these in May last year. And so this is your breba crop, or breba crop, however you pronounce it. And then the new growth starts at the same time. These are ripening, you get new growth that starts, and these are the figs that are going to produce the main crop that ripens in the late summer into the fall. So really can't go wrong. And some varieties don't produce, like my Panache normally doesn't produce this breva crop, and the Violette de Bardot does. And so I typically haven't been pruning this one very much because it always has those figs at the end I don't want to lose. Whereas I don't mind pruning back to Panache more because it doesn't have any figs on it normally. And let's see, yeah, I'm gonna skip. Well, this was a little experiment. I read an article in the San Gabriel Valley Tribune, a gardening article, that said that if you prune back your figs in the late summer, early fall, after you've harvested everything, you can get a late fall crop of figs. Well, I did this on both my trees. I did about 13 cuttings on each. And the Violette de Bardot only produced new leaves. I didn't get a single fig developing from this operation, whereas the Panache, interestingly, did produce a number of figs. But they're not ripened. They're not ripened now. They said they'd ripen in November. Well, mine did not ripen. They're still hard. They really kind of stopped growing a few weeks ago. They got up to about this size, and they just stopped growing. And so hopefully those will just hold on the tree, and I'll get a breva crop from this experiment. But so it apparently depends on the tree and how it responds to this. And neither one of them did what the article promised. And so Jujubes were our last one here. Pruning on these, they define 4 different types of shoots on Jujubes. They're the primary shoots that don't produce fruit directly, so the main trunk as well as side branches. And then there's secondary shoots from which spurs grow, and from which you get these fruit-bearing shoots. And so if you're trying to shorten a tree like Jujube, you'd want to make a cut on a primary branch. If you cut a secondary branch, it'll still produce. New growth will occur. But if you cut a primary branch, unlike most fruit trees, cutting a primary branch, let me show you the next picture, stops the growth for that season, this is really unusual. So it's kind of a cool thing you can do to kind of control the size of Jujubes. They did say if you made a second cut on the branch right next to it, that removes, then it will sprout. And so in this case, you see, they made that cut and it didn't grow this year. Everything else has leafed out and grown, but it did not, the bud there did not develop. Whereas when they cut it here and removed the extra side branch, it did develop. So interesting. I've never seen that. It's really unique for Jujubes. And I just added this slide because this winter I had a lot more pomegranates than usual, and the tree's getting bigger, and it's up against a wall, so I can't get around it fully. And of course, going in there with hand pruners to harvest it, I get stabbed everywhere. And so this is called a cut and hold pruner. I have the Corona one, which is shown here, and they come in different lengths. The one I have is about 4 feet, and so it makes the cut and then it holds onto the stem afterwards. It really helps with harvesting things like pomegranates. So I'm going to quickly go through Huanglongbing. As I mentioned, we have a grant to make sure everybody in California knows about Huanglongbing disease and are doing our part to help keep it from spreading. California, of course, is a major citrus producer, second behind Florida, and we are the #1 producer of fresh eating citrus. And Californians have a lot of citrus trees in our backyards, and so that's the problem right now. There's a lot of people who don't tend their trees, and they're not helping to control the disease. So this disease called Huanglongbing, or citrus greening disease, is the term that you often hear as well. Officially, it's Huanglongbing. It is spread by this tiny insect called the Asian Citrus Psyllid. The psyllid is it's about the size of an aphid, but it's very unique. If you see an insect that's got this sort of feeding stance where its head's down at a 45-degree angle, that's a psyllid. There's nothing else in our yards that's going to look like this. You're only going to see these, most of the time you're only going to see these when you have flush on the tree, new growth. They call this feather flesh on citrus. And it's because the nymphs cannot feed on mature leaves, so they have to lay their eggs on these really young leaves. And so we want to inspect those whenever we see new growth on our trees, which citrus can be multiple times a year, especially in a coastal climate. The nymphs are also unique. They're flat, little demonic looking with the red eyes. They produce honeydew just like other sap-feeding insects do, like aphids, like scale insects. And the honeydew is interesting in that it's encapsulated in these little waxy tubules. So again, if you see these little waxy tubules hanging from the tree, you know you have the Asian Citrus Psyllid and you need to look into doing something about it. I was going to say, what was I going to say about this? I'm blanking out. I'll go to the next one. Anyway, the psyllid itself does a little bit of feeding damage. It has a toxin in its saliva that it gets into the leaf, and it causes the leaves to be notched and twisted. So if you see leaves like that, you also want to look for the insect to see if you have the problem. The main problem is it can carry a bacteria called Candidus Liberibacter asiaticus, or CLAS. And this bacteria can only live inside a psyllid or inside a citrus tree or a close relative of a citrus tree. And when it gets into the citrus tree, it's going to eventually kill the tree. It creates this disease, Huanglongbing. You often see trees that are you'll have symptoms just in a branch of the tree because the insect fed in that branch. The bacteria got into the phloem, but it takes a long time. It can take years before you see the symptoms spread to the rest of the tree, because it takes time for that bacteria to go down the branch and then back up other branches affecting the tree. Once that bacteria gets down to the roots, though, the tree is a goner. It's going to kill it pretty quickly at that point. After a year or two after the infection, sometimes even longer, it can take years for symptoms to show up, which is one of the big problems with this disease. There could be a lot of infectious trees out there that we don't know about. One of the earliest symptoms are these mottled leaves. It looks a little bit like this kind of chlorosis can look like what you would see in a nutritional deficiency. But usually nutritional deficiencies, you see sort of a pattern that sort of is in between the veins. And so you can see the outlines of the veins. You don't see that with HLB. We call this a blotchy mottle that doesn't follow the vein pattern. And if you flip over the leaf, the back of the leaves is sometimes thickened, what they call corky veins. That's also distinctive for this disease. As it progresses, it gets into the fruit becomes smaller, bitter, drops off the tree. Oranges don't color up properly. Normally an orange will start coloring up from the base up to the stem, and this one, you see the base, the bottom of it is still green, so hence citrus greening disease. So in Florida, this has happened in Florida long before it happened here, and they're still growing these infected trees and harvesting the juice, but they're having to treat it in order to make it taste right before they can sell it. So this is again showing it only in one part of the canopy. This is showing a tree that's far along. It's got fewer leaves. The fruit, I'm sure if you saw the ground, the fruit's dropped on the ground. See, it's not coloring up. So trees like this are gonna die pretty quickly. This is a grove in Florida. So far, no California orchard has shown positive for Huanglongbing. They have found infected psyllids. This year, for the first time, they found infected psyllids in orchards. So I think they're assuming some of the trees are infected, but they haven't actually detected the disease in any of our trees. Florida got this several years before we did. It spread throughout their citrus growing regions. And the climate there is even more favorable for the insects. So it's really established there now. And the insect likes the trees on the outer perimeter of the orchard. And so you'll see those trees being removed first because they're affected. So in California, most of Southern California now has the insect. It's widespread. We don't think we're going to be able to get rid of the insect. Up in Central California, where most of our citrus is grown, the insect is found up there periodically, and they've been able to knock it down with pesticides. And so they don't think it's getting established up there, which is a good thing. But we do still have some commercial grows here down in Riverside, Orange County. Not so much in LA, I mean, not Orange County, but Riverside and San Bernardino County. Orange and LA County, there's very, very little commercial citrus left. And so this is really a problem of residential citrus in our areas. It all started here in Hacienda Heights because a homeowner went to China, brought back some cuttings in their luggage that they grafted onto an existing tree in the yard, and those cuttings must have contained the bacteria. And so that's why we cannot bring in citrus into California except through the Citrus Clonal Protection Program, which is run by the University of California that maintains clean citrus stock. And so we can't bring in stuff, there's lots of fruit you can't bring in, but citrus has its own program for making sure all the citrus we grow is clean. So this has been growing slightly. This year, actually, I've seen the least. I get notices whenever the boundary of this is the quarantine for the disease. So all these areas are within 5 miles of an infected tree. Anytime they find a new infected tree, they draw a circle of 5-mile radius around it and they extend out the boundary of the quarantine. This year, it's actually grown very little, so it may be a good side effect of COVID. We're just not traveling as much and moving things around. This is another map that we recommend. It's easy to use. We just call it the Bullseye Map. You put your address in here, and it'll show you different colored circles depending on how close you are to an infected tree. So about this time last year, some infected trees were discovered in Alhambra, San Gabriel area. And this is the Huntington Botanical Gardens that I chose as the address because they have a nice citrus orchard over there and I volunteer at one of their gardens over there. And so last year they put them inside the quarantine. So when you use this map, you'll get different messages depending on how far away you are. They are recommending removing trees if you're within 2 miles, with the idea being that you're likely your trees are infected even though they're not showing symptoms. That's a pretty hard sell. I don't think I'm not gonna take out my own trees until I have to, but something to think about. If it fits in with other plans, that's a good idea. If you just get a yellow circle, you're within 5 miles, and a green circle, you're outside 5 miles. And then again, as homeowners, we want to be inspecting our trees. If we do see the insect, we want to be looking for the disease as well. If you have the insect, or even just to plan ahead, you might want to be growing things that attract beneficial insects that'll naturally control the psyllid populations for us. So things that help with aphids will also help with these insects. So ladybugs, lacewings, syrphid flies. And there are some special parasitoid wasps that were imported from Pakistan that are now being released into California, into our area, that are very specific to the psyllid. They lay an egg under the nymph. The nymph, develops inside. I mean, the wasp develops inside of the nymph, killing it. and then exit the nymph, starting the whole thing over again. And there are these type of wasps for all sorts of, you'll say there are different wasps that do this with psyllids and aphids and other insects. But they like the same kind of habitat. Grow flower, these umbel type flowers are good pollen sources for these insects that'll help keep them in your yard. So, cilantro always bolts, early in the summer, but keep it around because the flowers are a great source of pollen for your beneficial insects. But lots of other things you can grow. Sweet alyssum is a favorite for these. Yarrows, California buckwheats, calendulas, lots and lots of things you can grow that are great pollen sources. If you have the insects, you need to treat somehow to get rid of them. If they're not getting rid of them by themselves. I found them for the first time in February in my navel orange tree. Only a few insects. I think I was able to find 4 of them. And the next day I couldn't find any, and I haven't been able to find any since. So I'm assuming the beneficial insects in my yard took care of it. I actually found some green lacewings adults in the tree. The adults aren't the ones that are doing it, but their larvae are. So they may have just taken care of it for me. But if they don't take care of it, you want to at least use something like a soft insecticide, a horticultural oil or insecticidal soap that you need to reapply every couple of weeks until they're gone. And then control ants. This is the most critical thing to do because the ants, because the psyllids are producing honeydew, the ants are farming them, collecting the honeydew, and protecting them against their natural enemies. And so this is showing you tanglefoot. There may be other brands of this sticky barrier that you first apply. You put something like cloth or paper around the tree and then apply this sticky substance to it. And you have to maintain. You have to go out there and spread it around once in a while because the ants will form bridges over it. Or then use baits, a combined strategy where you're also using toxic, low toxicity baits that are based on boric acid are the best choice. The brand I've used is called Taro, and I can usually refill those myself and make my own solution from borax, which you can get in the laundry aisle of any store that carries laundry detergents. And then when you're pruning, don't throw fresh citrus pruning waste into your greens container because now you're potentially moving the insect or the disease. And so it's recommended you just leave it on the ground for a couple of weeks to dry out or double bag it and put it into your regular trash can. So if you have the insect, there's really no one to report that to unless you're up in Central California and above. If you think you see symptoms of the disease, however, contact the CDFA. They'll come out if they think they may have to do a test. It's called a PCR test. It's the same type of genetic test that's used to positively identify coronavirus. But unfortunately, it has a lot of false negatives because they have to pick just the right leaves that have the disease in them. And so a lot of times they don't find it, even though the tree is infected. If the tree is infected, they will remove it. You cannot keep an infected citrus tree in California. So a little bit of good news. There's a lot of research going on. They're trying to find better ways of detecting the disease. They have dogs now that can sniff out the disease in orchards. Because it takes so long to find it, the other methods are waiting for symptoms to appear or waiting for the PCR test to be positive. They found out that the Australian fingerling, one of my favorite citrus, especially to share with kids when we do field trips, they love playing around with these. If you've never had these, you cut them open and you squeeze out the little juice vesicles. It's sort of like a citrus caviar. And it turns out this plant was naturally resistant to the bacteria. And so they can they found a peptide inside the juice of this that they're able to either inject or spray onto an infected tree, and it kills the bacteria in the tree. So it's not a permanent fix. I don't think it completely removes the bacteria, but it knocks it way down so the tree is still healthy. It's not available yet, but the research is still going on. Hopefully we'll see that marketed soon so we can use it if we need to. For more information, always go to the UC IPM website. Great source of information for gardeners on any kind of integrated pest management issue. They've got a long article here called a pest note or a short one-pager called a quick tip on the ACP and HLB. This is a website we created for our grant called Alternatives to Citrus, where we have links to all these different things, other fruit trees suggestions, recipes, a few other things for you to look at. And then some of the things I recommend for, the California Backyard Orchard is a UCANR website with 24 fruit trees that they profile for backyard growers, lots of links to other information. The California Rare Fruit Growers, I belong to a couple of the chapters of this group. This is the largest amateur fruit tree organization in the world, centered here in California. A lot of fun, inexpensive to be part of. And if you just go to their website, you'll find a lot of good information. For reading more about fruit trees, the California Master Gardener Handbook is great for all things gardening, but they've got several different fruit tree chapters. The Home Orchard is one for mostly deciduous fruit trees, and same with the Fruit Trees for Every Garden. That's a more recent book. I really like this one. It's real good reading as well as informational. And then if you're looking for a place to get looking for nurseries, the California Rare Fruit Growers have a page where they list nurseries in the area, but also all around that specialize in fruit trees. And then I've got links to the Master Gardener programs. Here again, I'll give you the PDF for this, so you don't have to write any of this down. Our website, our social media pages, information about some workshops that we're going to start up again in January that we do Tuesday mornings, twice a month. And then we have Victory Garden classes that we teach twice a year. This is, if you click on when you have this, you can click on this link and you can sign up for our newsletter. So you get announcements about all these things as they come up. And then I want to tell you that we're currently taking applications for the Master Gardener program for the class of 2021. They just showed this yesterday. They're going to have 3 Zoom workshops where you can go in. Anybody who's interested can just join on these to hear more about the program and why you might want to become a Master Gardener. The deadline is January 11th, and you must be an LA County resident adult over 18 or over. And it's a long program. It's about 13 weeks. Traditionally, we meet for 6 hours in person every Saturday during that time. But they're going to do most of this on Zoom this time to be safe. They're hoping to have a little bit of in-person, some special small group in-person things at various gardens like at the Huntington. But they don't know yet. I don't know yet if they've been able to work that out. And then I'm going to put up a link here for the survey in just a second. So just put Fall Fruit Workshop in today's date. If you want to get, we have a different newsletter. It comes out quarterly that we put out just for this project. So we'll put out one in January that has an article on citrus is what I'm going to work on, and a few other things. There's usually some recipes, some pruning tips. And then if you click on this, you're also going to be entered in a gift certificate drawing, and as well, we'll also send you a follow-up survey in a few months to see if. And these surveys are short; these are not the multi-page surveys you often get. I know we're all sick of surveys, but you don't have to do this part of it to do the rest of the survey if you don't want to get the newsletter. The survey is quite short. So thank you very much. This is my contact information. You're welcome to email me. I have this picture of the parent Washington navel. This is a really important historic tree that's still alive in Riverside. You can go visit it. It's on the corner of Magnolia and Arlington Street. It's almost 150 years old, very old for a citrus tree. They've kept it alive by replacing the trunk and roots. A long time ago, this tree almost died from Phytophthora, and they had to graft in something they call in-arch grafting. Some new trees, some trunks around the base of it, some saplings they grafted into the trunk of this, and then they basically replaced the whole trunk. And so if you see it from a different angle, you actually can look through the trunk. The original trunk is completely gone. All right, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
We do have a couple of questions, Jeff.
Right,
can yellow leaves on citrus be other conditions?
Okay, say that again. I didn't quite catch it.
Can yellow leaves on your citrus tree be any other kind of conditions, be other conditions?
Yeah, citrus very, very commonly has nutritional deficiencies, both nitrogen deficiencies, which can make the whole leaf turn yellow, as well as various mineral deficiencies like zinc and manganese and things that are very common in citrus. They sell a citrus nutrient solution, various ones. You can spray them on the leaves in order to get a quick fix, but I would do that in combination with a drench to get those nutrients into the roots and into the rest of the tree to fix those problems. But yeah, that's why it's so hard to identify Huanglongbing unless you're an expert.
Yeah. Are California oranges sprayed with pesticides for Asian Citrus Psyllid? What about organic oranges? I'm wondering if I should stick to eating organic oranges.
Well, yeah, the organic oranges still have to meet organic regulations, and so they cannot use the same pesticides that conventional growers are using. So they have a tough challenge right now to grow organically. Yes, all the other citrus is being heavily treated with pesticides right now.
Okay. Can an uninfected tree or can unaffected trees be moved out of the zone?
No, you cannot move because you don't know that tree is uninfected. Even though it's not showing symptoms, it may be carrying the bacteria and just not showing it, yet. So we're not allowed to move any green citrus material, period, within. You can buy a citrus tree from a nursery, move it to your home. You can't move it again after that. You can't take cuttings and move it. So like California Rare Fruit Growers does a sign exchange in the spring or late winter, and we've had citrus off the list for several years now. You cannot bring citrus cuttings in and exchange them. They've also now recommending if you're in the HLB quarantine area that you actually don't even move the fruit off your property. I'd say at the very least, make sure you don't have any leaves or any stems attached to that fruit, and you wash it off to make sure you have no psyllids on there, because they found that the psyllids will actually hitchhike on the fruit. They don't feed on the fruit. They don't lay their eggs on the fruit, but they will actually, they'll sit on the fruit and take a ride.
Someone said, thank you so much, Jeff. They learned a lot.
Well, thank you, Melissa and PJ, for helping out. Thank you all for coming.